Greetings from Highlights from the Hill. Our aim is to share the Word of God through universal Sunday school lessons published in Faith Pathway Bible Studies by the National Baptist Convention, USA. Our lessons are presented by anointed Bible teachers from Liberty Hill Baptist Church, where the pastor is Reverend Roy V. Elliott Jr., located at 1215 South Schiller Street in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, let's go into this week's lesson.
Greetings and welcome to our Highlights from the Hill. I'm Reverend Roy V. Elliott Jr., and I've come to give you a few points from this Sunday's lesson. We are in March the 2nd, 2025. Our subject is Bound by Love. We are coming out of Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 through verse number 14. Our key verse comes from chapter 19, verses 5 through 6a. And it says this: all of the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. There are three lesson aims for this particular lesson. Number one, review and evaluate the obligations implicated in the covenant relationship. Number two, commit to corporate worship as a ministry of proclaiming Yahweh's sovereignty to the world. And number three, express your identity as a member of kingdom of priests and a holy nation. In our introduction, it is very familiar to us when we remember that there was a time when people actually prepared themselves before worship, prepared themselves physically by preparing the meal, soaking the beans and peeling the potatoes and seasoning the roast and placing all the ingredients, making a gravy to the roast, and then putting in all the ingredients into the roast, putting it in a crock pot or some type of slow cooker that it may cook all night long. The young ladies were by the stove with the hot comb on the stove. You could smell the grease and the hot comb as it's being pressed into the young lady's hair. The mothers had already been to the beauty shop, whether it was in their house or in the actual shop. They were sitting around the evening having the roller sets in their hair. The young men had their shoes shined, their shirt ironed. They were prepared to go to church on Sunday morning. Sunday morning comes and everyone is able to get dressed. They still can smell the aroma of the meal that was cooked on Saturday night. The breakfast is being prepared. Everybody gets ready and goes to corporate worship. They prepared themselves physically, but also they prepared themselves spiritually by reading over, studying a Sunday school lesson to have a great dialogue on Sunday morning. And here it is. It really shows that there's a physical preparation and a physical preparation as we prepare to approach a holy God. Here it is. It really shares with us that there should be an importance and an emphasis on coming in the presence of God. And here, what we see in our lesson, it tells us that when we have the right approach to worship, it involves a heartfelt expressions to our faith with unconditional love and devotion to God. In our biblical context, we are in the book of Exodus, as we had forestated, and the book of Exodus is the second book in the Old Testament. It is part of the Pentateuch. We are in the 19th chapter, where we are beginning to explore the liberation of the children of Israel, that because they are free from bondage after 430 years after the time of Joseph. What we see with Israel being at Mount Sinai at this time is that when they have left Egypt and come to Mount Sinai, it shows how powerful God is and how powerless the little God gods of Egypt were. Here, God, through miraculous plagues, God, through the parting of the Red Sea, has shown us how powerful he really is. Our God has protected Israel while they were in the wilderness. It shows that not only is he a protector, but God is a provider. This lesson brings us to the mountain, same mountain that Moses had turned aside to see this great sight of this bush that was consumed on fire but was not consumed. Here it is, Israel is at Mount Sinai. Now at Mount Sinai, we find that there is a call to commitment. If we look at verses 1 through verse number 6, it says, on the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession, although the whole earth is mine. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. Moses has something to say to Israel because God has given him something to say. Israel has been traveling for 3 long months. No longer do they depend upon Pharaoh to provide for them, but now they are depending on God to provide for them. Not only will God provide for them, but God will protect them, because from them leaving Rephidim, it was in Rephidim that they were challenged because they doubted that God could provide. And here it is, Moses in Rephidim, he strikes a rock, and the rock gives water to the children of Israel. It was in Rephidim that Israel was in battle with the Amalekites, and in the battle with the Amalekites, Israel prevailed with victory because Moses kept his arms up. And so not only did God provide water through Moses, but God provide victory through Moses. And so it shares with us that there is a call to be committed to God, because God is our provider and God is our protector. Moses goes up to the mountain, up on the mountain in verse number 3, and God speaks to Moses. Here in this time, in this culture, people believe that the higher up of elevation were where the gods resided. And so here in this time that Israel and others, they worship high up on the mountain, and Israel worship on the mountaintops until the time of the construction of Solomon's temple. Here, these high places that they worship at, Moses is up on the mountaintop to meet with God. And here in verse number 4, it says, that tells us that God gives Moses a direct message. And when he gives this direct message to Moses, Moses has the responsibility to tell Israel what God has said. God has miraculously carried Israel out of Egypt, just like an eagle, a bird will carry his young upon his wing. This is a miraculous swooping away that only our God can do. This is a reason why Israel should be committed to God. Verse 5 gives us a covenant that has agreement that should be given unto them. And here it is, sharing that God has a plan for blessing his children. And this is a continuation of the promise that has been given to Abraham. And here it is, if they would obey the voice of God and keep his covenant, then they shall be a peculiar treasure unto God above all people, for all the earth is mine. We can see where God shares and shows his ownership. Not only does the whole earth belong to him, but Israel would be his peculiar people if they would just obey him, because he is an owner that has the ability to choose who would be his peculiar people. And so there is a call to commitment. And we must be committed to the call to serve God. Moses speaks the word of God to the people of God. That's what God gave Moses. Moses turned around and gave to the people. This statement was just not for Israel, but reality it is for the world to be a kingdom of priests. If we would just think about Israel, they continued to break the covenant. But then we have a new covenant under Jesus Christ because of his redemptive work at Calvary. For all of us who would follow him, this kingdom of priests, a holy nation, that it is a call for us to be committed to God ourselves. But then outline number two is agreeing to commit. Now, this is amazing because outline number 2 says, so Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. Moses goes to the elders, tells the elders what God has told him, and they tell the people what God has told. There is an expectation for the elders to relay the information to everyone else. So we see that the ironic thing that we have not gotten to Exodus chapter 20 yet, because in Exodus chapter 20 we will see the 10 commandments. But then from chapter 19 to chapter 20 we see a clear description of the covenant that God has given. But yet, even though they have not gotten to chapter 20 yet, where the 10 commandments has been given, and Moses is still to go and tell the people what God has told him at this point, the people have not received all the information yet. But yet, the people said all that God has said for us to do, that we will do. So they have heard, and since they have heard, now it is their responsibility to trust. Here they are trusting and learning that they must follow God, whatever God will do to and for them. Moses goes back up the mountain after this information has been relayed, and Moses goes back up the mountain and tells God what the people have said. What a beautiful picture of God sending his message and God's people responding to his message in an affirmation. But in verse number 9, we see that now God is prepared to have a physical manifestation. It is called a theophany. God will come down in a thick cloud to reveal himself and to give a sign of protection. Today, when we have a lot of information, isn't it amazing? In order to keep our iPhones and our iPads and those electronic devices from overloading, we will send our information up in a cloud. Somewhere in that cloud, that information is there. But when we look at our lesson today, we see that God will come down in a cloud. He would, in a thick cloud, his presence would be there. It reminds us that at the Mount of Transfiguration, that God spoke from a cloud. Reminds us that when Jesus ascended back to heaven, he stepped on a cloud. But here we see that God will come down in a thick cloud, a theophany, to show his presence to God's people. And it really helps us today that God is preparing here in a lesson to show the people that Moses has the authority to speak on the behalf of God. And he does this that the people will believe Moses. Now our last outline says a call to consecrate. Here it is, verses 10 through verse number 14. It says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain." After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. Here are clear instructions on how the people are to approach God. These instructions have been given unto Moses. Israel is to take 2 days and to prepare themselves. Israel is to take 2 days and to sanctify themselves. Sanctifying is to transform someone into a state of holiness. And on the third day, the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. We see the seriousness in approaching God because he set boundaries, perimeters around the mountain, and the instruction is that no one is to touch the mountain. And it reinforces that Moses, the people are to listen to Moses. These boundaries are to protect those. Someone may say that, why could they not touch the mountain? But it's to protect those who may have been defiled, or those who may have done some misdeed, because if they were to touch it, and God instructs not to touch it, then the person would lose their life. Look at it. No one is to even put a hand on the mountain. Not even an animal is to trample on the mountain, because if they do, be put to death either by stoning or by being shot by an arrow. This information, this instruction, anything that was defiled was not to remain in the midst of them while preparing to meet God. It shares with us the seriousness of the approach, the having the mind and the heart right to consecrate even down to their clothes, washing of their clothes, to get ready and be prepared to meet with God. When the trumpet sounds, a long sound of the trumpet, then they may come up to the mountain. But Moses himself went down from the mountain to sanctify the people. Moses had been talking with God, and now Moses has to go back down and get the people ready to approach God. Here it is. Spiritual preparation is appropriate when entering the presence of God. And this is what we can take away from this lesson today as we look at number 14, lesson number 1, but verse number 14 shares that our response to God's calling should be one of obedience and commitment, recognizing that he has redeemed us and set us apart for his glory. I pray that you would join us this Sunday morning, 9:15, here at Liberty Hill Missionary Baptist Church, as we go further into this lesson, bound by love, as we look at the children of Israel and at the foot of Mount Sinai, Moses who ascended to Mount Sinai, and then Moses who had come back down from Mount Sinai to consecrate the people to prepare for worship. I pray you prepare yourself tonight. Prepare your clothing, prepare your food, prepare everything, that when Sunday morning comes, the only thing we have to think about is getting ready to come to worship. We'll see you then.